Welcome to the YOUnify podcast. If you are new here, YOUnify is a global nonprofit organization. We are focused on helping you flourish and thrive. My name is Brandyn Keating, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of YOUnify and the host of our podcast. I'm super excited to be here today with Jim Ritchie-Dunham, who is not only one of my favorite people on earth, but also the editor of our new book, Leadership for Flourishing, and has many, 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 many other titles. So, Jim, I see that you are joining me from one of your many areas of work that you do at the University of Texas, Austin. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do there and what your other titles are, and maybe a little bit about your connection to the Harvard Human Flourishing Program?
Excellent. Well, it's great to be with you, Brandyn, as always. I also love working with you, and it's a lot of fun. And I'm one of the co-editors, as you said, the lead co-editor of that book. I'm here in my office at UT Austin and the business school, where I'm a clinical associate professor, and that means I mostly focus on teaching and doing research with projects like the one that we're getting ready to talk about. I also founded many years ago the Institute for Strategic Clarity, a nonprofit focused on how do we bring greater clarity around strategic issues to people around the globe. We'll talk a little bit about our research during the call. And I'm also affiliated at Harvard in the Human Flourishing Program, which we'll also talk about. An affiliated researcher, which means I'm part of the team. I'm lead co-author on, or lead author on a couple of the papers that we'll talk about and others, as well as I am a research associate in the Center for Work Health and Wellbeing, which means I have a different kind of appointment there, but that's in the School of Public Health. So a couple of affiliations there at Harvard, the Institute for Strategic Clarity, where I do a lot of my research work for the last 20-something years, and a clinical professor here at the University of Texas at Austin.
Woo, that's a lot of hats you're wearing, Jim. But I think a common theme there is flourishing, and it's certainly the thing that's brought you and I together, and the 32 co-authors of the Leadership for Flourishing book, or contributors, I should say. And so maybe the best place to start is just to share what is your definition of flourishing? It seems kind of like a big word, can have a lot of different meanings to people. What do you mean when you say flourishing, and what do you mean when you say leadership for flourishing?
Excellent. So, Brandyn, for me, flourishing, trying to get to the simplicity on the other side of all that complication is that we're better. And so, how do we know that we're better off when we're interacting with other people and on what dimensions? So, I think of it in alignment with what we'll talk about with the Global Flourishing Study. I think of it as I'm better off physically, financially, materially, as well as emotionally and mentally and morally. That I'm doing the kinds of things that I think better me in my life, as defined by me. So better, basically, am I better off because of what I'm doing or not? And so that's how I think about it. And leadership for flourishing is starting to recognize a couple things. One is that as leaders in organizations, at any level, whether it's the level of leadership of my own work or my team, a department that I lead, an organization, or a whole network, that my leadership matters in seeing that others are doing better. They're better off because they're interacting with me or my organization. And the leadership part is that it's also that the leadership has to take that up. So as a leader, I have to take up my own flourishing to be able to bring that into the world. So how does flourishing work for leaders, and how does leadership work for the flourishing of the organizations that they lead?
All right. So sounds pretty practical to my ear. And I think people still might wonder, there's a couple things I know about you that maybe the rest of the world wouldn't know, which is not only are you a business guy teaching there at the McCombs School of Business at UT Austin, you're also an engineer by background. So those seem like a couple of pretty mathy things. How does an engineer and a business guy get into flourishing?
Wonderful, because there's a lot of psychology and sociology in thinking about are people better off as they define it and as they work in organizations. And basically, the engineer in me thinks about things. He said, "Is this a good design?" And
Hmm.
when we start to see things that don't work, instead of thinking, well, I got to go to try to fix it, he said, well, what if we just designed it so that it did work? And then by going out into the world and seeing, are there examples of where it is working? So we don't have to design it from scratch if there are already people that are figuring out how it works and could work better. So that's what I kind of think about is if we're better off because of the systems that we're leading, then how does it work and what does a better design look like? And are there examples out there, which we'll talk about in the book, are there examples out there of what better design looks like? So then we can say, well, wait a second, why are you doing it this way that doesn't work? That's sort of the engineering approach that I see. And the thing I love about being in the business school is in the business school, it's got to work, right? So we can talk about all kinds of really nice ideas. He said, but does it actually work? And so there's a very quick run to making sure that it's productive, that it works, that it's implementable. And that's something that I like sort of testing the engineering thinking of is it a nice idea or does it actually do something and drive value? So that's part of why I like doing this as an engineer and being a business strategy professor. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I think it's kind of already maybe a little bit surprising to a lot of folks that you have that mix in your background, but and we'll come back to dig into more about flourishing and the practicality of, how do we design for what makes us better off? And how can we actually design our own lives and the communities that we live in so that every day we're getting better off? But before we do that, let's understand a little bit more about you. And maybe what's one surprising thing that people who already know you're an engineer, they already know you're a business guy, they already know you're a flourishing guy. What's one surprising thing about you that has nothing to do with any of that?
I love washing dishes.
I did not, I'm surprised. I find myself surprised. Tell me more.
I love washing dishes for two reasons. One, because I'm fortunate, I'm surrounded by really good cooks.
Hmm.
So my wife, my kids, my in-laws, our friends, they're all really good cooks. And one thing I realized quite a few years ago was that it's hard to walk into a kitchen and be creative when the canvas is dirty.
Mm.
And I also have some painters in my life and some musicians, my kids and friends, and then some painters. And if the canvas is dirty and the workshop is really dirty, it's hard to be inspired to go forth. Versus if there's a clean canvas and they walk in and all they're bringing is their creativity. So I realized, he said, I benefit greatly when they are creative in the cooking realm or the music realm. And what could I do so that it would make it that they were more creative in bringing that and the fun that we had in eating really great food that they enjoyed cooking. And we had great fellowship around that. And I said, well, if they have a clean canvas. And for some reason, I don't know why it doesn't bother me to wash dishes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think there's one other little fun thing is my father-in-law taught me this a long time ago, is that if you're washing dishes, people don't ask you to do other stuff.
Oh.
Because if they ask you to do other stuff, he said, "Oh, would you like to do the dishes?" And most people don't like doing dishes. So if you're doing dishes, it's meditative, it's contributing to a clean canvas, and people won't bother you to go do something else because while you're washing the dishes and they don't want to do that. And I got asked a couple of years ago by a family member said, "Well, you don't really like washing dishes." I said, "Well, I do." "Well, no, you don't." I said, "It's in the book." And it is actually, it's in this book, Economics. It's actually in the beginning chapter that I like washing dishes. And I said, it's printed. It's in a book. Therefore, it must be true. Of course, I
Therefore, it
wrote the
must
book,
be
so
true.
I use it as a story. But anyway, so I love washing dishes for the clean canvas so that people will bring their creative gestures and people won't ask me to do other things because I'm washing the dishes. So.
Amazing. I love this. So, um, and now everybody knows my secret about why I do dishes at parties, but there we go. Avoid being asked to do other things. So, Jim, I'm interested that you mentioned that you have a musician in your family, which I think is your son. And I realize that I don't know what's your favorite kind of music? What was the favorite concert you went to or first concert you went to?
Oh, that's also surprising. It turns out that I really like hard rock
Mm-hmm.
and opera and country music.
An eclectic mix.
It is, but for most of my life, it was the hard rock
Mm-hmm.
and the opera. And my wife figured out one day why I like both of those because people were yelling at me.
You like that intensity, yeah?
Exactly. And until I became an engineer, I had long hair and wore concert shirts and stuff like that when I was growing up. But as an engineer, they don't want to see you dressed like that or with your hair like that. So then I got a shorter haircut. But
But now I know that there's evidence, so we'll have to bring that out at some stage. Okay, so a lot of people right now are feeling, I think, a little bit overwhelmed. I know I have my days when I feel pretty overwhelmed by this seemingly never ending list of crises that we're facing, whether it's governance, whether it's hazards in the natural world, extreme weather events, whether it's poverty or hunger. We have all of these extreme challenges. And with all of these things happening that really deeply affect people's basic needs, do I have food? Do I have shelter? Do I have a system of governance that works? Why should we be focused on flourishing?
that's a great question. I think it basically comes down to if we, and these are observations from medical neuroscience work to science, to psychology, to sociology, as well as the engineering and organizational work, is when people are in a collapsed state, when they're in a scarcity mindset, and when they're not feeling safe to share or wanting to, then things get worse.
Mm.
And an easy way to think about that, I think, is in our work is if you're feeling bad and you're not really crazy about doing what, or you don't want to be doing what you're doing, and you're in a really bad state, physically, mentally, financially, socially, morally, then how much are you going to contribute of what you're doing? And if
Mm.
everybody else is doing that, then we're not contributing of our best, and then the group suffers and all the consequences of that versus saying, wait a second, but I'm actually wired as a human being to want to do better, to like, to feel that what I just did contributed to something, that I'm actually better off because of what I just did versus worse off. And so then it's just a choice, and we can explore it. It turns out that it's just a choice of, I don't like interacting this way. Can we interact in a different way? And if we interact in a different way, then it leads to far better. And sometimes that's really hard to see because we tend to think of this as nice. It'd be nice if we could be more trustworthy and safe in our conversations and generative, but we got real work to do. And what we're trying to do is to flip it on its head and say, all right, so if you shut people down and they don't feel safe and they don't want to share, even though you're paying them or brought them into the room, they're not contributing. Then why are they there? So you brought them in because they had something to contribute, but you're not bringing out their contribution. So flip that and say, maybe I want to create conditions under which you will, or which I will. And so then what are the things to do that are not really hard to do that can say, we need to bring out our better so that we can overcome and address and overcome some of these really big crises that we're facing. But collapsing into the crisis will never allow us to get out of that. It collapses everything we do, and we don't want to contribute, and we don't versus if we can see, well, there is a way that I can interact today, right now, that I feel better, you feel better because of our interaction. I actually enjoyed doing that and want to continue doing that. Then we're going to get far better, and that could get us out of these crises that we're in. And it's something that we can do.
So you have collected an enormous amount of data. And I'm really interested to hear as we think about, okay, how does that play out as a practical matter? How does this idea of acting in a way that everybody can kind of bring all of their gifts to answering this question of what does better look like? We might think, okay, well, in the workplace, that's one kind of setting, in sort of some of the more privileged places and rooms that we might find ourselves where people have the luxury of envisioning what does better leadership look like. And I understand that you've also collected data from all over the world, people with widely varying economic circumstances and life backgrounds. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And who are these people? When we say data, what does that mean? Those responses from people? What's the human connection there? And who are the humans? And what does that tell us about what it means to be able to focus on flourishing in the face of wildly different circumstances.
That's wonderful. So, an early observation in this, and I'll speak to the data that we have to support this, is that everybody I've ever asked in many different cultures and languages, either directly me or through translators or other people in our community, it seems like everybody we've ever talked to knows when they're in a really collapsed state. For myself and in groups that I really don't want to be in this group. I'm really disliking the experience of this group, and I'd really rather be doing something else. I mean, I'm actually worse off because I just spent time with those people. Everybody I've ever interviewed or talked with about this, from very poor to very wealthy, in all kinds of different organizations to in many different places around the world, have all told me that they know both of those experiences, or that experience. But they've also told me that they know of experiences where they felt better off because they just interacted with those people. He said, I actually enjoy being with you, and I'm looking forward to being with you, and I'm better off because of what we just did. I have more ideas, I'm more creative, I'm more passionate about doing what we want to do, and I want to continue working with you. And so far, everybody around the world has told me that they've had both of those experiences. So then it's not just in elite places where this happens, it's at their aunt's house. It's a friend. That when I'm with this friend group in that situation, it works really well. And we have a great time, or here we don't. So the question became is what's happening when if we know that both of those are true, what that says to me is that there's a choice here. Every single human being that I've ever met and heard of has said, yes, I have both of those experiences and I can choose, or I can have the positive. So it's not just wealthy people that get to have the nice experience, or in certain countries, it's everywhere. But it doesn't happen all the time, and it doesn't happen all the time for everybody. So then something else must be going on. So we developed this survey, the Agreements Health Check Survey, which is available for free at the Institute for Strategic Clarity, isclarity.org. And we have now over 233,000 people have described their experiences of groups. And that covers 126 countries. And that varies from people that are in big organizations and doing well at banks, churches, not networks, all kinds of civil society, business or government agencies, all kinds of different things. But it also goes from the very poor to the very wealthy. So we've had people that are basically have little primary education, meaning they've gotten through the basic grades but haven't done secondary education or college, to people who have advanced degrees. So it's not just one or any of those. And what we're finding is that through that, all that data, that there are examples of people that are groups that are doing very well everywhere. And so it's not just in a couple of rich cities and rich countries that they figured it out. So they're all in San Francisco or in LA where you are, or here in Austin, but they're everywhere around the globe. We've found in all 126 countries, lots of groups that are doing this. And then we've had the fortune to, through our network, through the Institute for Strategic Clarity Network, to work with a lot of these groups in 59 different countries. So not only have we found them through the survey, but we've actually gotten to work with them and see what they do and how they do what they do. So there we have that very large data set, and that continues to grow across all of those different kinds of human experience, as well as the Global Flourishing Study, where we have Gallup interviewing a couple 100,000 people, and then we have year after year. So we've already got the first and second year of data and collecting the third year of data now. So we have longitudinal data across 20 something countries, 200,000 people talking about their experiences, so that we can see, is this a more universal phenomena, or is it just a couple lucky people that happen to live in San Francisco and Palo Alto? And it's not, it's everywhere.
And when you think about what you've learned from all of those people with all of those different backgrounds from all over the world, what would you say would be the top three things that you've learned, both from examining their responses to the surveys and from your real life interaction across those 57 countries?
Excellent. So I think the first thing is that it's very clear, and as people start to enter this work, that they can do better. That better is possible, and that there are a lot of people doing that, and that those people that are doing it aren't really special. Because one of the easy things is, well, of course Brandyn can do that because look at who she is and what she's done and where she sits in the world and all that. I said, no, they start to see that there are people all over the world that they know of these people. Said there's nothing really special about these people. They're living better. So I think the first thing is that you can do better. So you don't have to accept this experience that you're having as defining your reality. You can do better. The second is now that you can, we start to know what it looks like. What does better look like? Wherever you are on that continuum with your experiences, they said we know what the next stage looks like or what the next level looks like. So what do people that are there do? I don't have to make it up and describe a panacea fantasy. I said I'll just describe what they're doing over at this sock company, or what they're doing in this community, or what they're doing in this village, or in this township in South Africa. I know what they're doing, and you can go see what they're doing. So we don't have to make that up. So you can do better. We know what it looks like, and it's everywhere. And so it's not just in a couple of secluded places or very privileged access places. It's everywhere. So, but how do you look for it? What this better looks like, and how do you find them? And I think the thing that summarizes all of that, and it's more in this agreements book which just came out, is focusing on your yes. And that's a language that people are really seem to be glomming on. I just found out that there are reading groups in a lot of different places around the world working through it. And it basically is, what is my yes? And said, because people seem to know when they're in their no, this is not my yes. This is my no. I don't want to be doing this. I'm worse off because of this versus this is my yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we summarize those three things that we're finding from the data and the experiences. People said, I know what my yes feels like. And wait a second, why aren't we in my yes? Why aren't we in our yes? And to ask other people in our group, are you having a yes here? No. Are you? No. And this is our group. So why don't we change? So maybe we could have more of that.
So, say again, Jim, the name of the book that you just referenced in case people want to dig more into that.
Great. So the agreements, it's called Agreements, Your Choice.
Mm-hmm. Agreements, your choice. And
More
there,
practical. Some of these other things are more technical or philosophical, but that book is intended to be more practical of how do you work through your agreements.
and in working through our own personal agreements, we can sort of in a very accessible way then kind of sort of start to look at our better off in the day to day, so we don't necessarily have to be trying to solve governance or, how is the planet going to be healthy. We can just start with our own yes and our own agreements and incrementally helping our day to day in the groups we're being a part of. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And for a very simple reason for me, from my perspective, is no matter what level of work people are doing, whether it's taking care of my grandson or doing teamwork or leading a department, or doing these very large level issues that you're talking about, it's always a group of people that are getting together to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And are we bringing our best? What are we bringing our yes to this equation? So whenever we get together, um, as myself and how I interact in the world or with others, are we coming out of that yes? So it's a very practical place to start. And what I find interesting in the reading groups that have started and sharing them with me, and we're even posting some of those on my blog
Wow.
now, is people saying, I kind of already knew that I was doing that, but I wasn't so conscious that I was doing that. So sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, but it's starting to give me a framework and a way to talk with others about, well, why are we doing this if I know this isn't right? And using that like yes or no. This is my yes. And they said, well, it's mine too. Then let's do that.
Yeah, what I love about the approach that you're describing is it sounds like one of the many things I love about it is that it sounds like, it's recognizing one of the things we talked about early on in knowing each other and that we see in our community engagement work all the time in YOUnify is that, everybody has this light in them, this magic creativity, however you want to describe it. And they can turn it up all the way and bring it fully, or it can be kind of turned down. And I think what I hear you saying is some practical steps that we can do ourselves in our own day to day and with the groups that we engage so that everybody's light is more turned up and so that we can come to creative solutions ourselves and together to problems ranging from the day to day to the global that might not have happened otherwise. And so I'd like to hear your reaction to that, but also in light of this book that we started off talking about, Leadership for Flourishing, and love to hear about, how can this book help people kind of turn that light on? What do you hope that people will take from this book?
Excellent. So one of the things that we wanted to show with Leadership for Flourishing is that it exists. And so there's a lot of work that's been done around this topic. And so we start off the book by highlighting what are the different groups of people that are figuring this out. And starting to show that what's emerging is now quite big. So it's not four people in some secluded place doing something weird. There are my conservative estimate, there are tens of millions of people that are living this way every day. And there are a lot of researchers and a lot of consultants and observers that are starting to find different aspects of it. And one of the things that we think we're contributing with this is starting to see how they inform each other. They're looking at different parts of the question of what does better look like and what does it look like for myself or for a team or for an organization, for economics, for politics. So they're bringing different aspects of it. So part of what we want to show with that is it's emerging, but it's getting big. It's now. So it's not a futuristic thing and it's not this very small thing. And to show what better looks like, and that better is possible. And then when we can also start to show what it looks like in different areas of application. So we have in the back half of the book, we have application to settings in schools with younger kids, to networks like your work, to work in the military, to businesses, to all kinds of different kinds of institutions, networks, to show not only is this emerging as a framework for what we're looking at, and that it's possible and that it's at a larger scale than we would expect. Also, that there are in each of these different sectors or ways of working in the world, there are different examples of how that's happening. And so it's not just an old people thing, it's not just a young people thing, it's not just a business or civil society or governance or network thing. It's happening in all of those places. And hopefully that will start to inspire people like, oh, wait a second, this is happening in medicine. I know it's not happening in medicine. Well, I said, well, we have a chapter on how the work that they're doing in medicine around this or in the military or, so there are lots of places that it's happening to inspire people with examples of that this is possible. And then I think finally it's that what we mentioned very briefly in the beginning, that leadership for flourishing is about the flourishing leaders themselves and the flourishing of their ecosystem. So that you have to be working on who am I and what am I being in the world? So that because if I just talk about it in nice ways, but I don't actually believe it and I'm not being it, then it's not going to work. So I have to be that example. And so does the organization or the way we work together support my flourishing so that I can bring out greater flourishing in others? And again, flourishing just means are they better off because of our time together?
And so, taking it a little bit full circle back to your sort of business background and engineering background, you have developed a tool and a measure that's called total value generated. And can you say a little bit about that and how that can help us apply flourishing principles in such a way that we see them show up in a really concrete way?
Excellent. So one of the questions that comes up as a business strategy professor and as well and a consultant as well as being an engineer is how do we know if we're better off? And so I've had the fortune to do a lot of that work in the psychology department in school of public health and caring about flourishing and just caring about people and that there's more love in their life or more that they're better off. But we started to try to figure out how do you combine all this and where we shifted to a few years ago, it's been more than a couple now, is to start showing there's actually real financial and material value in all of this as well. And said, let's start with this very basic idea. And we do develop this a bit in the book, but as I say, we have a lot of really robust subjective measures for asking people about their experience and checking that they're actually telling us the truth and this reflects any reality for them about their experience and how do you feel like your life is more stable financially, materially, mentally, socially, morally. And then looking at their actual behavior and what they actually do. And we call those more objective measures. But how do we start to put that all together? And the big shift with total value generated was two pieces. One was to actually ask people, how do you define better in your life? So tell me what that means for you in how you are physically, mentally, socially, morally, materially, financially. What does better look like for you? And not just assuming, well, you make more than $0 an hour, therefore you must be better off. I said, yeah, but I make 15, but I could make 20 if I walked across the street, or I could make 100 if I walked across the street. So what does better mean relative to your life? And how do you define that? And then let's go see your experience and your what we call those objective measures of your behaviors and your outputs, and see, are you doing better because of those interactions? So what that allows an organization to do is to start assessing, are people that interact with us, which we call stakeholders in this world, but are the people who interact with us, are they better off because they're interacting with us? Are they actually worse off because of the way that we extract something from them and don't give them much back? And what that's allowing organizations to do who've been working with this for the last few years is to demonstrate that the people that interact with them are better off because of those interactions. And that can be your customers, your employees, your investors, the communities that you're working in, even the environment for some. But what that starts to, and what does that mean for organizations? So everybody is better off as well as the company. But what we start to realize then is if everybody is better off, then there's more desire for them to interact with us. Because what they usually experience is they're worse off because of the interaction. I got something out of it, but it broke, or I didn't like it, or you didn't treat me well, or it took me forever to get on the call, and then the service didn't work, whatever those things are. And that's a more normal experience. So for groups where people they can demonstrate to themselves and the world that people are better off when they interact with them, then they have lower risk of sustaining that. So what we talk about in business and organizations is, do we have a sustainable ability to generate value? And so what this flips is it's risky to create a system where people are worse off when they interact with me, because that means that I'm going to have to work harder and harder to get people to come to me because I'm extracting value from them, and they're net worse off than they started when they're interacting with me. Versus total value generated says, well, wait a second, they have told you in their own experience and their outcomes that they're better off because of working with you. So the risk of you losing them is far lower. So it's actually a much better investment. And that's where actually big investment companies, you know the names of, that are working with us, trying to say, wait a second, it's actually lower risk to invest in a total value generated net positive organization because they don't have the risk of losing all these people, because people know that they're better off working with them. So it's a framework that we've developed and done quite a bit of measurement around. An idea, to finish that off, an idea that we had in the book that we talk a lot about is ecosystem-wide flourishing. So it's human flourishing for everybody that's interacting with us and the environment. And say, what does that look like? And what is that? And what's exciting there also is it's not just flourishing because it's nice and I'm better, but it's also better amidst the adversity. So all the challenges of life, and I'm actually better off. I'm striving towards these things. So we actually have measures now that we can say that we're actually better, and that helps us identify those groups that are doing that we want to learn from in our local communities. And so it turns out that it's pretty straightforward for people to know. He said, "Oh, I know a group like that in my local community." Well, then why don't you go figure out how they're doing that? Because to be able to do that, they must be doing something different than what your group is doing.
Jim, this has absolutely flown by. I could talk with you about this for the rest of the day, but I'm going to close us out with a couple of rapid fire questions. And, one of the things that I love about your work and what you're sharing is this idea that everyone everywhere can be a leader every day. And again, coming back to the Leadership for Flourishing book, if I'm a business leader, or if I'm a stay-at-home mom, or if I'm anybody under the sun who maybe does or doesn't relate to any of the sectors that you mentioned, just trying to get through the day, in one sentence, if you could do it, why should I buy this book? What will be in it for me?
That better for me and everybody that I care about is available, and we've figured a lot of this out. And the we that's figured this out isn't a couple of academics sitting in ivory towers. It's humanity all over the place. So what we're doing is help showing you how to find them. But your better every day is available to you right now, and there are examples all around you of what that looks like in your own communities and your own way of interfacing with life. And now you can start to find ways to find them and learn with them.
And if I wanted to take just one small step today or tomorrow to flourish a little bit more, what could you recommend? One tiny achievable thing that anybody could do?
I think the tiny thing that's really easy to do is also the really hard thing to do. And that's the wonderful thing about being a human is to actually ask myself, am I better off? Is this my yes? And it's a deep philosophical moral question that people have struggled with in every community for thousands of years. But it's also a really good question, easy question. He said, is this my yes? And if it's not, then said, can I change it so that it is? And again, people need to be safe and not do things that are really dangerous to do to start with. So if I know I'm going to get in a lot of trouble or lose something really valuable to me by asking that in that situation, maybe you don't want to start there. But just asking, you're with your friend, he said, this isn't what I want to do. I said, well, then just stop and ask. I think the really simple thing anybody can do is this my yes? Is this in who I am? And if it's not, then can I change something about it that is? And what does that look like?
And if people want to dig more into the agreements fields and some of the tools that you've developed, how do they do that? How do they find those tools? How do they find you?
Excellent. So they can look at the Institute for Strategic Clarity. We have links there to what we call a knowledge base, which is video interviews with a bunch of people doing this work. They can get the books on the Institute for Strategic Clarity. If they can't afford the book, we also have PDF versions for free of some of the agreements book and some of these other pieces. Not the Leadership for Flourishing book, but they can find it there. They can find it in articles and chapters that we've written. So there are a lot of publications that are available to them. They can use the survey that we've talked about for free. It's available for them free there online. And then if there are other ways that they want to get involved, then they can read the blog. So you just look up my name, Jim Ritchie-Dunham, and I'm the only Jim Ritchie-Dunham on the planet. So that's easy. And we have a lot of stories that people are sharing about that there. They can do exec ed with me or research projects here at UT Austin. We very much welcome that. And then also just look at leadershipforflourishing.com. And there's a website of our community and what other people like you are doing in that space. So they can connect to events or finding local people that are doing these kinds of things. And they can also just get one of these books and start looking at what kind of questions and create local reading groups or people that want to just talk about these things. And it turns out that that's a pretty common thing to want to do.
Amazing. All right, y'all, I've got something you can do right now to help create more flourishing in your community and in your world. And it's press that subscribe button on this YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, download the podcast, do all the like and share, comment stuff that helps this content get to more people. So many people just don't even know where to begin to help themselves, their family, and their community flourish more. So if you can help us help the algorithm get us to more eyeballs, that's something you can do with a simple click that will actually make a really big difference. And we'll have all sorts of links connected to the podcast and the social posts we're doing around it to help you find more pathways to really simple, easy daily things that we can all do. Thanks so much, Jim. What a pleasure to talk with you. And thanks so much for your good work on the book and all of these tools that you are providing folks that are so deeply practical to help us all flourish and thrive.
Thank you, Brandyn. This is deeply within my big yes, so very appreciative of the opportunity. Thank you.
Mine too. I appreciate it. And I'm so impressed by